For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grebner-Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Rooted, where this week I have lots of secrets and a few fun facts up my sleeves about the plant of the week, pumpkin. To not hold all of the secrets in, I'll let you in on kind of a big one first, and that's that all squash, including pumpkin, are secretly kind of the same plant, just with different mutations and variables. So they're kind of like citrus, but for some reason it was more mind-boggling to me. Anyway, now that cat's out of the bag, let's smash some pumpkin facts, shall we? Now, pumpkins, as I'm sure you're familiar, are the big round orange fruits we're seeing all over right now as we get ready to celebrate Halloween. And while they can be all kinds of shapes, sizes, and colors, today we'll be focusing on them just fairly generally, but I'll be sure to shout out any super notable varieties as we go. Pumpkin, or Cucurbita pepo, is a member of the Cucurbiaceae family, with famous family members like spaghetti squash, zucchini, cucumber, and watermelon. Best known for their fruits, which are technically berries, pumpkins are warm weather crops with large lobed leaves that often have prickly spines all over the stems. They have a thin, kind of tissue papery flower. Some are male and some are female, which makes them reliant on pollinators or very dedicated gardeners with an army of paintbrushes. The large leaves provide cover and shade as the fruits develop, preventing burn and helping to keep the soil from drying out. As the summer turns to fall, these large fruits are ready to harvest, with the largest among them weighing in somewhere between 150 and 2,000 pounds, with the current record going to an Atlantic giant pumpkin dubbed Michael Jordan that weighed in at 2,749 pounds and reportedly took up like an entire parking spot. And that was gifted to us by grower Travis Ganger in Minnesota. As a 3-time champ, I know I'll be watching to see what he does this year, and we also just have to give a quick shout out to Minnesota for having like all of my niche horticultural interests. They've got big pumpkins, rare lilies, passive-aggressive seed art. Like, you know, the State Fair in Minnesota is the place to be, and maybe next year we'll do a little trip out there. But back to pumpkins. Did you know that the United States is actually one of the biggest exporters of pumpkin in the entire world? This makes sense because pumpkins and their relatives are native to North America. In fact, the name pumpkin is possibly believed to be derived from the Wampanoag word pumpkin, which roughly translates to grows fourth round. But there is also some evidence to suggest that it comes from the Greek word pepon, which means melon, and is how we got pepo, which botanically refers to large berries with smooth or ribbed skin, a thick wall of flesh, and then embedded seeds. So that's your pumpkin, cucumber, watermelon, those kinds of things. Believed to have been cultivated even over 10,000 years ago in what is now Oaxaca, Mexico, original pumpkins were not the delightful delicacies we know today. In fact, they were small, green, and exceptionally bitter. But they were great for holding things like water, grains, and all kinds of other goodies. And they stayed good for a long time, making them very useful in winter months when substantial food would have been much harder to come by. As we continued to grow and evolve alongside pumpkin, they got bigger, sweeter, and more productive, eventually giving way to varieties like the field pumpkin, butternut squash, and sugar pumpkins, which are what a lot of us think of when we're thinking about buying pumpkins to roast at the grocery store for things like pies. Of course, we really can't talk about pumpkins without discussing the Three Sisters legend and indigenous growing practice. To start with the story, I'll be telling a rendition as it's been told to me primarily through a Potawatomi lens, but there are a variety of different stories across nations, and I would encourage you to look into them. especially those from peoples who originally inhabited wherever you're calling home now. According to the story, one particularly brutal winter, people found themselves with very little food. They were hungry, scared, and worried about how they'd make it through until spring. During one especially brutal winter storm, 3 women appeared out of the snow. Weak, weary, and in need of support, they asked the people of the village for help. Quickly, the villagers started a fire, and each grabbed some food that they felt they could spare for the women. It wasn't much, but it really was all they had. Thankful, the 3 women later revealed themselves to be 3 spirits, one of corn, one of bean, and one of pumpkin, and they swore to the villagers that they would never go hungry again if they planted their seeds together, providing them with a stabler source of vitamins, protein, and carbs that could easily be dried and stored for long periods of time, all while helping to support the soil, which made gardening easier too. In some of the other stories, the seeds of the 3 sisters are actually said to either be gifts from Sky Woman or representations of her children, but no matter how the story goes, the facts are the same. The so-called 3 sisters can always be counted on to provide for anyone dedicated to caring for and cultivating their relationship with the earth, and should be held dear as gifts. To plant them, bury the seeds close, but not too close, and watch as corn springs up first, loosening the soil as she grows, and providing structure for bean, who adds nitrogen back to the soil to help feed her sisters as she scales the stalk of corn to leave room for pumpkin, whose large protective leaves help to keep her sisters cool and shade the soil at their feet, keeping the soil protected from the sun so it can hold on to its nutrients and its moisture. This method of planting is fairly well studied and has been found to be as productive, if not more productive, than commercial crops, as it requires about a quarter of the space, fewer resources, and little, if any, pesticides, as all plants are less susceptible to pest and disease when not planted as a monocrop. The one thing this method of planting does require is a bit more time compared to commercial harvesting techniques, which don't work for this rather detailed harvest. But I would argue that it's time well spent, especially if you invite a few friends and have a garden harvesting party, which, for the record, I'm always down for. And coming as a shock to probably none of us, pumpkins have historically been seen as a symbol of prosperity and abundance due to both their ability to give us brain-saving carbs in the dead of winter and the sheer number of seeds they have packed in there. In addition to the whole fruit, pumpkin seeds have their own significance, often being used in spell work as a way of attracting opportunity and new beginnings. While people in North America were using their pumpkin powers for good, my ancestors across the Atlantic were doing something, I guess, a little less wholesome. The story goes that a man named Stingy Jack was out to get as much out of life as he could. So he went about tormenting Satan himself for a bit of a thrill. He started out the way most bad dates would. He invited the devil out for a drink, and then essentially refused to pay. But Jack put kind of an extra little special twist on it, where instead of holding the devil verbally hostage while explaining that Franz Kafka is actually funny, he got the devil to transform into a coin, then tucked him into his pocket with a silver cross, keeping him trapped, and presumably covered in lint, for over a year. Then after a year, he got bored and decided to free the devil, who I guess must have been very lonely, because before long, Jack had him climb a tree to pick some fruit, only to carve a cross into it and keep him trapped for an entire decade. Shortly after freeing the devil again, Jack died, and God took one look at this unsavory man and basically slammed those pearly gates in his face. Apparently, there was no room in heaven for someone so rotten, even if they were bullying Satan himself. And obviously, Satan also was not super thrilled at the idea of having Stingy Jack stinking up his corner of hell, so he sent him out too, this time cursing him to walk about in the dark forever with only a burning ember for light. After a while, Jack got tired of burning his hands with the coal, so he hollowed out a turnip to keep it in. And that, dear friends, is the origin story of the jack-o'-lantern. Of course, as Irish immigrants started coming to America, they brought this tale with them. And as time went on, we switched from carving the traditional turnip to a bigger and honestly more customizable pumpkin. Now we keep them on our porches as a way of protecting ourselves from both Stingy Jack and any other malevolent spirits who might be wandering about on All Hallows Eve looking to make a ruckus. In other famous pumpkin men, we have Peter Pumpkin Eater, a man who famously had a wife but couldn't keep her. And in most stories, this literal killer is said to have trapped his wife in a pumpkin for her infidelity, where she lived out her days as a pumpkin prisoner. That rhyme goes, Peter Pumpkin Eater had a wife but couldn't keep her. He put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well. Which is a far cry from the original. Peter, my Neeper, had a wife, but he couldn't keep her. He put her in the wall and let the mice eat her. You guys, what were we doing? Which, that is bad, but is still somehow better than this other version that was inspired by it, which is Eeper Weeper, Chimney Sweeper, had a wife but couldn't keep her, had another, didn't love her, and up the chimney he did shove her. What are we doing? Why are we doing that? But now that we've had our creepy nursery rhyme fun, we can jump into the medicinal uses of pumpkin, which I promise are much less disturbing. Pumpkin was often called on to treat stomach issues because it's a filling and nutrient-rich food that's pretty easy to digest, making it a good food to start giving to anyone who's having a hard time not puking, as it helps to replenish a lot of really important nutrients and give the body the sustained energy it needs to recover from fighting off whatever germs it's got to get rid of. Additionally, I'm delighted to inform you that I have another Halloween cure for worms, because apparently that's just a little annual treat to me on the show, okay? Pumpkin seeds are potentially helpful in treating notably non-demonic nematodes like H. baccari, which take up house in various bellies of livestock and people alike. In a few preliminary studies, scientists found the extracts from pumpkin seed, specifically those taken in an ethanol extraction, interfered with the nematode's ability to reproduce by interfering with the eggs hatching, and this is largely due to the active chemicals cucurbitine, berberine, and palmitoline, with berberine also helping to reduce some of the inflammation in the liver commonly associated with these infections. This is especially useful for agricultural applications where it's most cost-effective and currently being studied in applications where nematodes have become resistant to current medications. Now that we've really dug deep into intestinal nematodes, it feels kind of mean to talk at length about the culinary uses of pumpkin, which I'm sure you all know and love or hate by now. Maybe I'll share some interesting dishes on Instagram, or whip up something for mocktails and mixtapes on the website, but instead of giving you a potentially empty promise, I'll instead take this time to tell you about what I think we need to see at the LA Olympics, pumpkin chucking. Growing up near the pumpkin capital of the United States, shout out to Morton, Illinois, I'm familiar with the sport, but had no idea that it was such a big deal. To those who are not in the loop, pumpkin chucking is basically where people make homemade catapults to literally fling pumpkins across a field. It's as glorious and potentially dangerous as it sounds, and one of my new dreams is to someday have a team where we take this all way too seriously, but in the silliest manner possible. And if you're down to join, please let me know what you think the team name should be, because I'm open to suggestions. That's all I've got for this week, but I'll be back next week with an equally delightful fall treat for us all to talk about. See you then!
Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me. I'm Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Fren of Fren Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.